Well, now that I got you both here, I want to take 1 second to give a shout out to our sponsor. All right, now that that's over. Now that it's confirmed that we're pricks. So I kind of wanted to touch on privacy, how privacy can be applied to home mining. I know that that's like a really deep rabbit hole, but I would like to kind of give it to, give the kind of information that somebody like me would understand. So like really dumb it down, because I know you guys have like a vast understanding, especially like when it comes to privacy and all the other aspects that can come along with this particular topic. So if I'd like to like get a gist of where somebody can start, some simple things that people can do to like better improve their privacy with the home mining setup. Because I know when I bought my first miner and I plugged it in, I was like, ha, nobody knows I'm mining Bitcoin, look at me. Only to figure out that was not true. So I don't know, I guess we'll kind of go through it. I had some suggestions from people like, hey, when you have multiple people on, try to like ask a question and then have both of them answer it. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if you've ever listened to my podcast, but none of my shit is ever that fucking organized, and it's just going to be a dumpster fire of an open conversation. That's the way I like it.
Yeah, it should just be a conversation. I don't know why these things have to be so like structured or whatever. Like, we're just chilling, kind of talking this stuff over. I think Eco probably has the best grasp of all of us of this whole hiding the fact that you're mining. Put out an excellent thread on Twitter about it. I just want to, as you said, it's definitely a rabbit hole, and as with everything to do with privacy, none of this stuff is quote unquote perfect. It's all just a goal, another step to take, another thing to move toward this endpoint that you're probably actually never going to reach. But, the journey is the entire point. Every step that you take matters. So, it's fine to not be so hung up right off the bat on, oh my God, how do I go completely anonymous? It's completely fine, in my opinion, to buy a miner and plug it straight in and be super psyched that you're now mining KYC free Bitcoin, because just because it's not completely anonymous has absolutely nothing to do with the fact of whether or not it is what you would call KYC Bitcoin. It most certainly is not. It definitely is more private than someone buying off of a regulated centralized exchange. You're light years ahead of that person if you do nothing. Now, if you then want to continue on and take further steps to protect yourself from what I do believe is inevitable regulations, then, I encourage that. But just, I don't want people to get discouraged thinking that, they're not doing enough or whatever. It's all about the journey. Every step matters.
Yeah, I want to echo that. It's definitely just like any other privacy effort. It's incremental steps that you take towards achieving your end goals. And, like Diverter's saying, I think you just get a miner and plug it in. You're already miles ahead of people that are using Coinbase to get their Bitcoin or whatever KYC exchange they're on. But there's definitely good reasons to keep taking those steps forward, even though you're ahead of the curve. I think what a lot of people have to realize is that the only thing constant is change, and the KYC creep and the invasive tyranny that kind of erodes our rights away and our freedoms away, that's never going to stop. And especially as Bitcoiners, I think Bitcoiners in particular have a lot of targets painted on their backs, from governments, from regulators, from centralized planners, from political parties who think they're opponents, from their neighbors, from environmentalists. So, I think there's a lot of good reasons to really just keep on moving once you start going down a privacy rabbit hole. And yeah, I mean, just getting an ASIC and mining non-KYC Bitcoin is a huge start, but I don't think anyone should. I think there's good reason for anyone doing that to continue pushing in that direction and take those next steps. Learn about using a VPN for your network privacy. Learn about on-chain tools like Whirlpool. And I think that's probably a good starting point to make a distinction. You've got your networking privacy, which is like your internet traffic footprint. And that's something separate from your on-chain privacy, which is like you receiving your mining rewards and then spending that, and what's available on that public ledger, on the Bitcoin ledger, to any outside observers. So there's a couple of forks just right there from a privacy perspective when it comes to mining.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one that I would add to that I kind of want to touch on too is the physical privacy of home mining, whether it be a sound dampening enclosure, how you're a good way to disguise the heat that you're creating. I think that's important to touch on too, right? And like my thought process behind having both of you come on was, I know Akano had done some writing on the internet traffic footprint end of things, and I know Diverter has done some things on like the physical privacy of mining. So and then you have me, that's just I don't even know. I dabble in things that interest me, I guess.
You are the facilitator, sir.
Yeah, that. So I think a good place to start is the internet traffic footprint, and just for the people who think that may not be a big deal, what does it matter anyway? Just in the last 24 hours, my son wanted to see the new Spider-Man movie that just came out. So I fired up my Linux laptop, and it slipped my mind to turn on the VPN on my laptop, and I opened up Popcorn Time, and my wife called me in about 10 minutes. She was out of the house, and she called me in 10 minutes, and she said, "What are you doing right now?" Because I just got an email from our internet service provider, and they called twice saying that you're using some kind of a torrent system, and you need to stop now because you're violating copyright laws.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So I then turned around and went to the guy who I do the Linux work that I do with. And, we went into terminal on my machine, and he was like, we ran through a couple of things, and he's like, pull this up, and it pulled up a list, and he's like, yeah, you see that one, and that one, they all say listening right next to them. Those are all the internet service provider listening and sniffing packets that are coming in and out of my home network. So for the people who don't think that it's a big deal, like there's a really good chance that your internet service provider is sniffing all of the traffic that's coming in and out of your house. And that was within 10 minutes of doing it in a podunk town. So if you're somewhere with a more of a populace, chances are you're, even if you think you're not being watched, like you're being watched. And Bitcoin mining may not be a big deal now, but as you guys stated, there could come a time.
Well, the key, one of the big keys, if not the big key, when you're talking about anything to do with privacy in general, is understanding the threat. I mean, we talk about threat modeling all the time, but that's essentially what we're doing here, is just gauging the threat. Without understanding what exactly the threat is, then how can you possibly go about guarding yourself against it? So, as you said, obviously, your ISP is they want to know what's going on. They want to know what you're looking at. Your ISP is collecting all this data. They are completely within their rights to sell this data to advertisers, whoever they want to. It's completely legal. So that's definitely happening. But even further than that, we're talking about Bitcoin mining specifically. which, regardless of how many compliance bros want to talk about, putting it in their 401k or whatever, Bitcoin is at its heart a subversive technology. It explicitly subverts the power of central banks around the world, and especially talking about the United States and the world reserve currency status. This is, if Bitcoin is to be successful in its goals, I can't see any way around there being a fight coming our way. Specifically, talking about mining, what you're doing is you're earning money. You're creating your own money. This is an income, and anyone that has had any dealings with the United States knows if you earn an income, Uncle Sam wants his cut. So anyone that is not reporting this income on income taxes, right off the bat, there you go. You're evading income taxes. You're a felon, essentially. So there are numerous threats and numerous reasons of why you would want to protect yourself from any outside parties like your ISP or the government or whoever, knowing that you're mining Bitcoin. Before we ever even get into the whole, they're trying to actually attack the network, or we're entering an actual adversarial environment. Just the fact that you're not reporting this on taxes, that's enough in and of itself for them to start trying to take a look at what's going on here. So plenty of threats, from this very basic one. If you want to go all the way up to the tinfoil hat adversarial environment, they're literally trying to stop Bitcoin. There's plenty of reasons to protect yourself.
I agree 100%. And it's really easy to take steps to put some protections in place and kind of build these gaps between you and your ISP. And I think it's important for people to realize that, all mining traffic is unencrypted and clear text. So you're really a low hanging fruit when you're mining Bitcoin and you're just plugging your machine in. So all Stratum V1 communication is unencrypted. It's clear text. It's really easy for your ISP to see that, and to see that you're mining, and to see which mining pool you're connecting to, and looking back in on you from the other side of the connection. It's easy for the mining pool to see your IP address. And so if you think about the trajectory we're on, and some potential threats we may be facing in the future, it could be advantageous for you not to let your mining pool see your IP address, just in case they're approached by a government or by regulators that start clamping down on them and telling them that that they're getting served with a John Doe summons to collect all the IP information that they have on their servers. And then the law enforcement could take those IP logs and go back to those ISPs and then and give another John Doe summons to the ISP, and then they would be able to get some identifying information as to who you are. And so if you can put yourself in a position where the mining pool doesn't see your ISP, and where the mining pool doesn't see your IP address, and where your ISP doesn't see your traffic, or they can't see the contents of your traffic, nor can they see where it's going, and you can do that without introducing latency, like, why wouldn't you just take those steps and do it? It's not that hard to set up a VPN and start mining through a VPN, which solves some of those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's we talk about looking at your threat model and stuff like that. I mean, the threat model for somebody, if either one of you disagree with this, please tell me, but I would think somebody who's mining in a rural area that is using a internet service provider that may not be one of the big internet service providers, right? So in my area, like, there's Verizon and Comcast. Those are huge internet service providers. So if something like the government or law enforcement coming after it, like you were just talking about, Econo, the first place they're going to go is these big internet service providers. So obviously your threat model might look a little different if you're using like a lesser known internet service provider or something like that. But again, like you said, it's not hard to implement the things that you need to implement in order to make that not part of your threat model. So why not just do it?
Sure. Well, the entire point about this whole like no KYC thing, the whole point is to stay off of their list. That's it. That's literally all it's about. Just stay off of the list. Don't be the low-hanging fruit. And so, in order to avoid that, what do? Well, you don't hand over your entire identity in order to purchase some Bitcoin. That keeps you off of their warrantlessly accessible database list. And the same exact principle applies here. It's very simply, don't be the low-hanging fruit whenever they can issue just a blanket request or subpoena for everyone with a certain port open, or whatever they want to do. It's the whole point is don't be the first guy that gets shot coming through the door there. You're wide open. You've got no protection. As you've said, it's not very difficult. You're not going to introduce latency. You're not going to destroy your mining rewards. None of that's going to happen. It's essentially all upside. So the whole point of this is in order to just take a few little steps, get yourself a nice amount of protection, and then move on to the next.
Yeah, and I think this too, not to get like off the topic of mining or anything, but I talked to somebody about this applying to running a node at your house too, because a node gives a very specific repeating amount of traffic that is constant. So it would be easy for them to look at the data that's coming out of your residence and know that, hey, this specific pattern of information going out and packet size is coming out of this residence, so there's a pretty good chance that they're running a node.
Yeah. I'll tell you a quick little personal story there. A little while back, I hit a little snag and and was nomad for a moment, and I didn't necessarily have a nice concrete place to call my own, and I'm basically on zero, believe it or not.
Hashtag on zero.
Yeah, I'm hashtag been on zero. So, like I'm literally like looking to buy me a place to stay, and I'm doing all this stuff, but I need my Bitcoin. Like it's all my money. I don't have any cash, so I need my node. I don't have anywhere to run my node. So all that to say, I talked to a buddy of mine, and I was like, "Hey man, look, I don't want to stay with you. I don't want to do none of that. Just let me plug a computer in at your house for a couple of days so I can get my node up. I'll connect to my node. I'll handle my business. I'll be out of your hair. It'll just be a couple of days. No big deal." And he was like, "Sure." I plugged it in, and man, he came and showed me his phone was just like on constant vibrate. Notification, all from his ISP, like freaking out. Like, dude, what are you doing? And he came to me scared to death. Like he just knew I was doing some kind of illegal, like, I don't know what you got going on here. I just know something about, you told me earlier about Tor. And I was like, dude. But yeah, but point being, yes, that node hit online and they panicked.
Yeah, and I mean, I assume the web traffic looks different from mining depending on how many machines you got running, how many shares you're giving, and all of that stuff. But I know, as far as a node is concerned, it's a very distinct footprint for your activity. This many packets, this often, this is the size of the information packets that are going out. Now, does something like a pfSense router fix that, Econo?
To be honest, I haven't looked at any sort of like data packet analysis related to nodes. So I can't really speak to exactly what that fingerprint is or what they're seeing there, but you know what, and also I should mention, like, I really don't know PF Sense all that well. Really, the first the first experience I had doing anything network related was when I set up PF Sense to make those VPN tunnels to mine with. And so I have learned a little bit, but so I can share what I do know about PF Sense, and that's that it's really easy to integrate multiple VPN protocols. So if you want to have like Open VPN, you can do that with PF Sense. If you want to have WireGuard, you can do that with PF Sense. And then you can set up a subscription with a VPN server provider like Molvad, and they've got they've got the technical ability to create the VPN tunnels over the WireGuard protocol. And so you can do some really creative things with the VPNs and with PF Sense and with WireGuard. And what that's going to do is it's going to like keep your ISP from being able to see what your internet traffic, what's contained inside of that traffic, because it's that encrypted tunnel is going to keep that data from being observable by your internet service provider. And your data is going to go straight to the VPN server. And then from there, it's going to go out to the wide open internet. So wherever it goes from there, it's going to conceal your actual IP address. As far as like, being able to mask any sort of like data packet fingerprinting analysis, I'm not sure that any of that is going to be concealed using a VPN. It might be, and maybe Diverter knows, but I don't know if it is or not. I would think that, like, most nodes run over Tor now, or they have the ability to, at least. And so I would think that would help. But again, I don't really know like what an ISP looks for when they're trying to do that sort of analysis.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really either. I would just imagine like there would be certain ports that they would be able to tell was like, what, 8333, is this port open?
Right.
You know what I mean? So like, I don't know exactly how exactly they would go about doing it, or what exactly you would do, other than, running this VPN and trying to obscure your endpoint and your beginning point from two different adversaries.
Yeah, I'm almost thinking if there was a way that, I wasn't sure, I should say, if there was a way that, if I have several connected devices running in my house all at the same time, if all of that is getting bottlenecked together inside the router and sent out to the ISP, or if they're all coming as, I guess they would all come as distinct ports on my local network, right? I would think. That would be my guess anyway. But either way, I don't think it's, like you said, it's not overly hard to implement something to put up some kind of a barrier between you and them being able to see, hey, this is where you're connecting to. It's definitely a good first step, even if they can see the size of the data packets and the frequency of them. What are you in Canada?
Hong Kong, baby.
Yeah, as long as even if they can see the size of the packets, if they can't see where the packets are going, I think that's half the battle.
It could be. I mean, there's so, I mean, you're putting out. I come back to the old saying, like, every contact leaves a trace, right? And so anytime you're interacting, you're exposing so much metadata, and you just never know how they're using that metadata against you. And so the more you can do to minimize that contact surface, then like the more you can minimize the traces that you're leaving. And and the less likely you are to be that low hanging fruit, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I had reached out in a group chat that we're all in, and shared something. I'm not sure if you saw it, Econo. I know you did a diverter, but I talked to Max a little last week about the availability availability my wife has to get information. She's in marketing, and I reached out in the group chat the other day, and she had sent me something that it only takes 30 seconds of being on her company's website, and something that runs in the background builds a profile based on your IP address. And she was sending me screenshots, and it gives them a picture of your house, the size of your driveway, how many vehicles you have registered, all of your social, so any social accounts you have that are linked to that IP address, all of this stuff in 30 seconds of being on their website. It builds a profile and gives it to her. This is something that they can get. Like, you're not talking about security clearance. She works for a car dealership.
Right. Yeah, that's not good, man. And I just think anything you can do to like Diverter said, anything you can do to stay off of the list, like you should be doing that, because once you put that information out there, you don't have any control over it any longer, and you don't know what anybody's going to do with it, what third parties are going to be selling it to, what kind of honeypot it's going to wind up in, what kind of data breach it's going to be subjected to. Like, and it can, and I think this is kind of where people start getting like paralyzed with like, well, they once you understand like the scope and how big the like data industry is, and how much data is collected on you, and how much your metadata can reveal about yourself, it really becomes overwhelming when you start looking at how you can start taking steps to safeguard that. And I think a lot of people try to do too much at once, and they wind up getting burned out, and then they just kind of give up and develop this like defeatist mentality. Like, well, I was KYC'd when I was born, so I might as well just not even bother putting in the effort to safeguard this stuff. I'm not doing anything illegal. Screw it. They really just stop making those forward progression steps. And so I just urge people to just start simple, start small. Like, just if you want to do something that has a big impact, that doesn't take a lot of effort, like just stop using Google services. Like, delete Google Chrome from your computer and download ungoogled Chromium, or use Tor more often, or switch over to Firefox. Change your DNS server settings to like an ad blocking, tracker blocking DNS instead of like a Google DNS server. And those things don't require anything special. It's just downloading a new browser and going into your router and switching a DNS setting. And it can have a good impact on the kinds of tracking that's being done on you, and those kinds of profiles that are being built about yourself. But you got to start somewhere, and you got to start doing something.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole, I'm already in the system, and it's their game, so I just need to play the game and be a part of the system. I mean, I'll call him out because he gave me a tip for the podcast to just talk shit about him. So, Nick from Kaboom Racks, I told him, we were talking about business, and I told him that prior to getting married to my wife 6 years ago, or about that, I didn't exist on paper for like 10 years. Like, my last known address was like 10 years old. No phones registered in my name, no utility bills, no leases, nothing. Like, that was just, I don't know. That was always the mindset that I had. Like, why would I want to give out all this information on myself? I was thoroughly paranoid in my early 20s that, black helicopters and Alex Jones and all that good shit. So, that was just the way that I lived. And I was talking to him about business, and he's like, listen, bro, it's their game. You got to play inside their game. And I'm like, it just kind of, it doesn't jive with my personal ethos when it comes to like, I tell them what they ask for. I'm not in the, I'm not of the practice of just volunteering information for the sake of volunteering information, quote unquote, because I'm not doing anything wrong. Like, I think that's the weakest fucking argument ever. I don't have anything to hide. That's not the fucking point.
Right. So you don't have a Facebook account?
Nope.
Good for you.
I have a MySpace. It's still pretty fire if you can find it.
I think it's funny that Facebook has an onion address, a Tor address. I just think that's hilarious.
I didn't know that about Facebook.
Yeah, it's Facebook core www.i.onion. Yeah, Facebook.
Huh.
For your privacy.
Oh yeah.
It's just hilarious to me. You can't create an account only through the Tor site, though. Just let's not get crazy with it. But yeah, they definitely. It's just always something that cracked me up.
That's kind of how Proton Mail is too. Like they have their .onion, but you can't create an account from it.
Right.
Yeah, weren't they just compromised like a couple of months ago too? They gave out a bunch of IP addresses on a warrant.
They're a little, like, I don't know. Listen, I've had something in my gut that just told me to get off of Proton. It's been like 18 months ago now. It's been a while back, and I can't really explain why. I don't really have a whole lot of evidence to give you, but I just didn't feel right with it. It didn't feel good. I don't know, whatever you want to make of that, but it just didn't feel good. And I kept seeing these little things that just made me even more not like it. And like we were talking about, you try to sign up through the onion address, you get redirected to ClearNet. And it's just a couple little things here and there that it's just like, man, I just don't have, why though? And so, and it makes it hard because they make a good product. They make a really good product, as a matter of fact. And they've got the calendar out now. They got their Proton VPN. It's an excellent VPN. They've got all kinds of stuff. Proton Drive. They make excellent products. But I just didn't feel good with it, and a couple little things that I saw just even more turned me off from it, and where I finally was just like, screw it, I'm getting off of it. So I dumped the email, the VPN. I dumped everything. I went switched over to Mulvad VPN, switched over to C-Templar for my encrypted email, and I just left it. And since then, I mean, like we talk about, they updated their privacy policy now to saying something about how they track IP addresses of suspected criminals. I believe, if I recall correctly, that was the way that they put it. The Swiss privacy laws are not really holding up as well as one would have liked, it seems like. They're a 14 eyes country, and I mean, who knows? You start talking about this stuff, you start getting into kind of like the conspiracy theory stuff, and I really hate doing that, especially on a company that I wouldn't really say Proton has really done anything to, in my opinion, that would be like an absolute deal breaker. And what I mean by that is, as far as I can tell, unless I've missed it, there has been no like decrypting of emails for anyone, no matter who required it. I could be missing something here, but now obviously, if you're decrypting emails, you have the ability to do that, then that is an absolute deal breaker. Other than that, it's just these things that kind of give me an uneasy feeling about it. And so I don't rail against anybody for using Proton. I don't necessarily discourage anyone from using Proton. I think it's an acceptable service to use. I don't have that big of a problem with it. I just am a little uneasy with it. So I just moved away.
And I think that highlights that if you have something that's really critical to communicate, use PGP encryption.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And
email.
use keys that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say you're 100% right. I mean, email will never be a secure messaging platform. So anything that is absolutely, like you said, critical. You can't rely on any third party to encrypt that stuff for you. There's just no way. You
Right.
have to encrypt it yourself. So yeah, you're 100% right.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's great being able to use tools like, end-to-end encrypted messengers like Threema. I got my mom on Signal a couple of weeks ago. That was just like a huge relief for me.
So good.
Just that small step in that direction.
Yeah.
And I do use Proton Mail. I use Tutanota as well.
Sure.
And it's great having these tools.
Yeah, and they work great. And the problem, whatever. With these encrypted messengers and stuff, the whole deal is like, if you're using an encrypted messenger, but literally nobody you talk to is, then who gives a shit? Like, it doesn't matter if you're the only person on session. Like, who cares? Excuse me. So that's kind of like the point with Signal. Is like, like I hate some of the stuff about it too, and like the mobile coin stuff is crap. Like there's all kinds of stuff that I don't like, but their encryption is top notch. Their product is outstanding. And if you're living in the United States, you are living in an SMS based communications area. United States communications are SMS based. I mean, that's just what it is. A lot of other countries outside of the US, they don't use SMS. So it doesn't make nearly as much sense for them to be like, Signal maxis or get everybody on Signal. In the United States, where SMS is essentially required to communicate with people, phone numbers and SMS, that's how we talk. Then yes, Signal is an absolute must. And the fact that it can replace your default SMS messenger in Android is like a major win. That is a major win because, you're not having to get somebody to get onto a separate messaging platform to then use an encrypted messenger, because that's the whole key. It's not that you're having to introduce a new app platform. All you do is just replace the default SMS with Signal. Now they still get all their same text messages, all the same stuff, still comes to them. But between you and them, your communication is now end-to-end encrypted. And so if you can get the people closest to you on the same end-to-end encrypted messenger, then that's a big deal. And it's the same thing with stuff like Proton. Now, Proton and C-Templar, they both have the ability to encrypt to a non-Proton or C-Templar user, which is huge. That's a major win. And basically what they do is they just make a little temporary mailbox, essentially, and they put your message in that little mailbox encrypted. And then you encrypt that with a password. You then have to communicate that password to, your recipient out of band, though. So you have to have another communications way to get that password to them. But if you're able to do that, then you can encrypt the email if they're not a user. But it's much easier if, Eco uses Proton. I use Proton. It's automatic. It's all end-to-end encrypted. So the more people that we can get on the same messengers that work, that have good end-to-end encryption, that have a track record of doing the right thing, the better. Everything is kind of gets splintered off, and because everybody's got different messengers that they like the best. And when we're talking about Bitcoin stuff, this Bitcoin community is literally a global community. So, when you're talking about Threema, like there's people in Europe and area, like they've been using Threema for years. It's the only messenger they use. So, it matters geographically where you're at, what's going to be big in your area. But whatever that is, as long as it's a proper app and its encryption is proper and it works like it's supposed to work, then, the next step is to try to get everybody that you can on it and not stand quite so much on this like fundamentalist, like, I'm not using Signal because it's based in the US, or it uses a phone number or whatever. Like those are things that, okay, it kind of sucks. I hate it. But if you're in the US, you use phone numbers. Like that's how things are done. So it's not that big of a problem. You know what I mean? Like people get hung up on that stuff sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I wouldn't let any of that stop you just from moving forward, just trying to do something. You know, that realization dawned on me a couple weeks ago. I realized if I've got this cool Google Pixel that's been flashed with Calyx OS, and I'm using these, you know, taking all these steps to guard my privacy, but then 90% of the communication I'm doing is with people that don't take any steps whatsoever, then, you know, like 90% of my communication is, it's not providing me the protection that I'm trying to seek. So I went and got a couple of new Pixel 6s, and I flashed them with Calyx. So I upgraded my phone, and I've been setting up my wife's phone all day today. So now that now she's got Pixel 6, it's got Calyx OS on it. I put Signal on there for her. I put a fresh Samurai wallet on there for her. And I put, I'm getting our Nextcloud server set up. I took a old Raspberry and turned it into a Nextcloud server. I put a password manager on there for her. You know, and I'm just trying to like put in all that work so that at least the communications between my wife and I are better protected. Whereas before, I was trying to protect myself, but then it was just kind of this like privacy leak communicating to her, you know?
Exactly. You're Uncle Jim, you know, for lack of a better term, you're Uncle Jim, you know, and that's kind of the whole point that I try to get across in some of the stuff that I wrote about the Uncle Jim topic was, you know, the fact that you can be as private as you want, but as long as you're communicating with other people that are not using these same services, then, you know, when you share you can be like completely staunchly against uploading anything to Google Drive. But if you share that same file to somebody else and they are using Google Drive, then guess what? The file still ends up there, you know? Right. So the whole point is, if you are the people that you communicate with the most, which has got to be, you know, friends and close friends and family, if you have the ability to set up these services like Bitwarden, like Nextcloud, you know, these things where you can then, once you set it up as the administrator, you can take the responsibility of saying, okay, look, the whole deal is we're trading off the responsibility of having to host this data and be responsible for all of it. We're trading that off to, you know, a Google or whoever. Mm-hmm. So if you're willing to now take on that responsibility, that's a big step, but you've got to know what that entails. But you can do it. It can be done. And once you do that, now you're the administrator of your server. Now all you got to do is say, hey, you know, go to your wife or whoever, and here, visit this URL. This is your Bitwarden. Set up an account. Boom. Now you've got Bitwarden, and your Bitwarden is hosted by me. You know, we're running this server. This is your Nextcloud. And so now when you're sharing these things, even if they're not encrypted, the fact that we're not hitting these major surveillance caches and, you know, and just handing over everything that can be just dragnet surveilled, that's a major, major win. And it doesn't take a whole lot of work. It just takes one highly motivated individual that is able to do these things, and then, you know, welcome on the people that you care about.
Can you just define real quick for the people who don't know what exactly like an Uncle Jim situation means?
Sure.
Like what that term means.
Sure. Uncle Jim, I'm pretty sure Matt Odell is the one that actually coined the Uncle Jim term. But what Uncle Jim refers to is the tech guy or the Bitcoin guy in your friends or family group. Basically, everyone has that guy in their family or their friend group. And it's a very good possibility, if you're listening to this podcast, you in fact are that guy. and everybody looks to you when they have a question about why their phone's messing up, or what, you know, why their computer won't start or whatever. You're that guy. So you are Uncle Jim. The point of Uncle Jim is it comes down to the fact that radical personal responsibility, which is what we're advocating for here with this Bitcoin thing, with this be your own bank thing, that is radical personal responsibility. There is no customer service coming to save you if you make a mistake. You are done. It is all on you. That amount, that level of personal responsibility absolutely does not scale. It cannot scale because, 8 billion people across the world do not want to be their own bank. They're not interested in it. They don't care. They don't want to have to care about it. They'd much rather, whatever, do literally anything else. Watch TikTok videos. They don't care. They just want this shit to work. So
Right.
if you then are privacy conscious and you don't want all of your data and all your communications and all this stuff to be hitting these dragnet surveillance companies, then it is incumbent upon you to set this stuff up. It is incumbent upon Uncle Jim to be the guy that is the guiding light that can set up all this stuff. And once you've got it set up, now you can go to somebody and say, hey, you know how every single service or every single website that you log on to, you know how they all have to have a password? So like you need like literally 55 passwords a day to get into all this stuff. I know good and well you're not using a good strong password for each one of those. Good chance that you have one password that you consider strong and you use it across all of them. And so what happens is as soon as one of those get breached, all your passwords are now breached. So there's a fix for that. Check out this cool little app. It's called Bitwarden. You just put it on your phone, and then whenever you go to a site where it needs you to log in, all you do is just tap on the login, and you get a cool little pop-up right there. It pops up for you. It remembers your passwords for you. All you've got to do now is the same thing you've been doing. Remember one good, strong master password. That's all you got to do. You could set it up for them. Now you've got that hosted on your own server. Once you have introduced something like Bitwarden, which is actually a convenience ad, most of the time when we're talking about these privacy tools, we're talking about, having to give away a bit of convenience in order to attain some more privacy. That's usually how it works. With something like Bitwarden, for example, a good password manager like that, it actually is a convenience ad. It's one of the rare things where you can increase your privacy and add convenience because it makes it much easier. You don't have to remember all these passwords. You have good, strong, secure passwords. We've got a little pop-up that does it automatically for you. It's great. Once you've kind of got the door open with that, now all of a sudden they're much more interested in maybe hearing your second suggestion. Maybe now we can talk about, getting on Signal. So becoming Uncle Jim is accepting the fact that you are the tech guy, the Bitcoin guy in the family. Accept that, embrace it, understand what it means, what the amount of responsibility that it entails, and bring your family and your friends, your loved ones, bring them onto the lifeboat with you. Don't watch them drown just because they don't care. It doesn't matter that they don't care. You care. And the fact that you care means that you also then have to care about what they're doing with their data, because their data is basically your data.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I did the same thing. The first step for me, when I moved to a open source phone, was me and my wife don't communicate via, we don't even use the regular phone now. If she ever calls me, it's over Telegram. It's become a normal thing. It took a little while to get her used to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know Telegram's not the best thing in the world, but it's miles ahead of standard text messages and standard phone calls.
Sure.
And it's all in, like we've said a couple of times, it's all in degrees, right? Like, I know people who don't care, and I have people who I look up to, one of which I reached out to today asking him questions about the VPN. I was trying to change some stuff in my VPN, and, his response is, oh, VPN. He's like, you have to assume that your VPN is compromised. You have to assume, he kind of takes the Odell stance almost on it all, and he'd kill me for saying that because he's not Odell's biggest fan. But but he's just like, you just have to assume everything is compromised. He runs SSH tunnels to somebody he knows that owns a server in the Czech Republic or some shit, and that's how he tunnels his internet traffic. He's an old school guy.
Sure.
But he doesn't. So the whole point of me saying that is you have people that are on like that extreme that are like, none of those services work. This is what, if you're trying to achieve privacy, this is what it'll look like. And it's the most extreme, black ops version you can think of. And I know people on the opposite end of the spectrum that don't give a shit. And, I try to pepper in between with people who have varying, degrees of understanding about this stuff. And I think it's important for everybody to do that, because 9 out of 10 times, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm much more comfortable learning from somebody I consider part of my friend circle. Like, hey, I know you know more about this. Can you kind of help me get through this?
Sure.
Than just going on Twitter and being like, hey, I don't know anything about this. Can somebody help me?
Yeah, of course. But the thing about what you're saying there, because this is very common in people that, like you said, take this to the extreme, and talking about assuming all things are compromised. It's very helpful to an extent, but there's a line where that can become actually kind of destructive to the goals that you're trying to achieve. Now, I'm all for adversarial thinking, but you have to be able to do it within reason, and that's, from what I can see, that is like the biggest problem. Is what you've just described. There's almost always just these two complete polar opposite camps that you are either all in or don't give a shit. And there is an entire gray area in between there, where you can do some great things for your privacy. And no, of course you're not 100%. If you get a targeted attack by the NSA, what do you want me to tell you? Should have used Signal's probably not going to work out that great. You know what I mean? Like, no, it's not that easy, but the whole point is that's not really the world that most people live in. Most people are not NSA targets. Most people are dragnet surveillance targets. So if we can get off of these few little services, it makes a huge impact. And, like people send me, sometimes people are writing up like guides and things, excuse me, in this space. And for some reason, I can't square it myself, but they, value my opinion on it. So they'll send it to me before they publish it. And they'll be like, hey, what do you think about this? Give me some feedback. Almost without fail, the only feedback that I ever really have to give to them is to tell them to make it less extreme. Don't make it more palatable, because here's the thing. Like you talked about learning off of somebody, the type of person that you want to learn off of, people are sometimes amazed that other people want to learn off of them when they're fresh into a space. There's a reason for that. It's very intimidating to try to learn things from an actual like expert, and like, a black ops type guy that's just super into it. It's very difficult to learn from a person like that, because you're just so intimidated. They can't understand why you don't understand. It makes for there's a lot of friction there. But somebody else that they're not an expert, but they know more than you, and they can understand the problems that you're talking about. So it's much easier to talk to this person and to let them know your stupid ass question that you can't ask your other friend, because he's just going to mock you. Those things help. Those relationships help. So like you said, a person that's actually like a friend or someone you've built a relationship with online, it's much easier to then approach that person and say, hey, like, why is this happening, or what can I do to fix this? As opposed to, like you said, the guy that's using, SSH tunnels to some, Russian that he uses a Dropbox somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that guy. I don't know any of those people in real life. Like, I want real life solutions, and I want to learn from somebody that I feel like is going to understand where I'm coming from with all this. And if you're on that pole, if you're all the way on that extreme, it makes it hard for people to approach you and understand what you're really saying. So I generally speaking, I try to be pretty cautious about that stuff. I don't want to sound like super technical. I know that's how a lot of people do this, is they want to use big fancy words and say these topics that makes them sound like they're very smart. Like I have no interest in that, because I'm not all that smart. I'm kind of persistent, so I'll figure it out eventually. But that just means I'm going to understand the same problems you run into, because chances are I hit those same problems too.
Yeah, I think it's important to have, find one person, like you said. It's important to say there's a lot of people that like to read up on things and use big words and sound like they're really informed about certain topics. My experience is the people that are super informed about those topics are often not the loudest person. They're usually somebody that you have no idea is actually informed about those things until you initiate a conversation about it. But it's important to have that person, in my opinion, it's important to have that person in your circle, because it gives you something to shoot for, right? Like an end goal, right? Like there's this guy that can help me and give me real world solutions, right? And then, but I know over here I have this guy, and he's like kind of what I aspire to, right? I aspire to be that private, but one of my mentors used to tell me, if you don't have something that you're aiming for, you'll never realize how short you're falling in the process, right? So it's important to always have that like far end goal. Like you said earlier, you may never reach it, but at least you have a perspective of like, hey, there's room for me to improve, right? Because thinking you got it figured out and thinking everything's perfect is a terrible fucking place to be.
You need people all along the line. I've said a few times that I kind of, as far as like self-hosting stuff goes, like my goal is basically just to be the gateway drug to get you to Ketan, so you can get like, I just want to get you in the door. Once you're in the door, I can point you at this guy, and then he can take you from there. You know what I mean? Like you just continue to level up and level up and level up. But you need somebody that's able to get you in the door. And in order to do that, it's very difficult to do so without scaring them off, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, like, as far as this whole privacy series that I've started to put together on this show, the whole point of that was for exactly what you're saying, right? So when I first started really getting into Bitcoin only podcasts and not listening to podcasts where people occasionally talked about Bitcoin, I was pointed in the direction of Dispatch. Now, I love listening to Dispatch now, but the first time I put Dispatch on and listened to an episode, it was like they might as well have been speaking Chinese. And I don't speak Chinese. Like, I didn't understand a fucking thing they were talking about. Like, maybe, 4 out of every 10 words made sense. The rest of it was way over my head. So the whole point of like doing this was to kind of like you just described, hey, this is kind of like a gateway into the privacy thing. And then if you want to take it further, like, cool, take it further and go reach out to some of these people that you hear, and they can point you in a better direction. Because I feel like the material is out there, but whenever you see a show put out a privacy series, it's, you bring on and I really like that Econo said that. Like, I don't know, everything there is to know about PF Sense. And like, that's a good thing in my opinion, because when you get somebody who's a quote unquote expert in, say, PF Sense, they can come on and talk what to them is normal conversation, but to anybody listening who doesn't understand PF Sense, it doesn't make shit for sense.
Yep. Very common problem. Very common.
So that being said, I think we kind of, the takeaways from that are like, get a VPN, look into a privacy-oriented router, take up some of these other use some of these other services that can be potentially connected to your mining activities, right? Email addresses, whatever.
Yeah.
I think is, as far as internet footprint, is like a really good starting point. I kind of want to take a shift now and look at physical privacy of mining, and I kind of want to know what both of you have to say on that topic. So with that, I'll shut up and let you guys go.
Well, I was just, before we totally jump ship on that, internet footprint, I was going to say I think events like the address ownership proof protocol, the AOPP, that was in the headlines recently. You know, when stuff like that comes out, I think it kind of opens up the eyes of a lot of users, and it's really easy for them at that point to see that it's not a stretch of the imagination, that at some point it's going to be a problem holding Bitcoin in self custody, and that process isn't going to be as smooth as it is today. And you know, there's people like us privacy advocates, like Diverter and I have been screaming from the rooftops for the last couple of years at least that these centralized KYC services are a bad idea, and it's only a matter of time before having self custody of your Bitcoin is looked at in a way that is, you know, I don't want to say illegal, but it almost seems to me like these regulators certainly frown upon it. Like they don't want you to have Bitcoin in self custody, right? And because there's a lot of power in that, and so when people see the, you know, when they hear people like me or Diverter saying it's one thing, and it's easy for them to say, oh, that's just FUD. You guys are just you KYC, anti-KYC anarchists are just full of FUD. It's easy to brush off. It's easy to discredit. But then when they actually see the news break, and they see it in the headlines, and it becomes very clear where the dots are, and it becomes easier to connect those dots, then I think people want to start taking those steps. And you know, they kind of realize that they should have been doing this yesterday. And
yeah, that's 100% right. And they should be welcome, though. You know, that's kind of one of the things that we should probably touch on as well. I mean, it's very easy to be the told you so guy, but it's much more productive to be the, well, you know, I kind of try to tell you, but you know, now that you're here, and not beat them over the head with this ha ha ha, you know, dummy, how could you ever fall for that stuff? Because at some point, it's a very good chance we all fell for some stupid shit at some point and had absolutely no idea of adversarial thinking or anything of that sort. So it's important to welcome new people into the fold. We need all the people that we can get. Like you just said, it's easy to brush this stuff off and act like it's no big deal or it'll never happen here. But once it hits you over the head, a lot of times it's too late at that point. So as we've been talking about, this whole thing is just about their content is out there. So it's now just a matter of getting people to the place they need to go, not trying to overshoot them. When you see somebody like we're talking about right now, talking about VPNs, you know, don't try to overshoot what they're looking for. You know, let them get some information about VPNs. Very simple. Before you go into the, you know, here, create your own SSH tunnel to Russia. You know, like let them download Movad one time first. You know what I mean? And be like, okay, this is a VPN. You know, there's something to be said for that too, because, and I know Odell's brought this up before, but it's a good point. It's worth mentioning. When we're talking about VPN service providers as opposed to like running your own VPN service or whatever, there's trade-offs to everything. You know, if you are using a good, reputable service provider like Movad, that does everything that they can to actively not collect any data about you. Like, it's the least intrusive sign up for an account you'll ever see in your life is Movad. It can't get any less intrusive. So there you see the trajectory, you see their goals. Being able to use a service like that, even though obviously now Movad is able to see your internet traffic, of course, that's a given. And if you want to assume that they're compromised, I mean, to an extent, sure. But the trade-off is that you're blending in with this big Movad crowd, as opposed to using your own personalized VPN from X address being able to be banned, blacklisted, whatever the case may be. So it makes it, there's still a trade-off there. Even if you're running your own server, that can be great to an extent, but there's also something to be said for blending in with the crowd, as long as, like I said, you use a good reputable provider with a proven track record.
Yeah, definitely. Just to touch on the the self-custody thing that Econo brought up really quick, the real life example that kind of made me see that as a potential threat is very simply the same idea as there's nothing illegal about having $50,000 in cash. Try to explain that to the traffic officer that pulls you over for doing 6 over the speed limit and finds $50,000 in cash in your car.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be the same idea with self-custody of Bitcoin. There's not necessarily anything quote-unquote illegal about having that self-custody of Bitcoin, but, we'll stop flagging that address when you can prove how you acquired it and that you paid the proper taxes and all that on it. Same idea as holding an assload of cash. There was something in the news not long ago about a lady that had 150 grand or something on her, got pulled over and spent 3 days in a police station trying to get her money back. It was her life savings. She cashed out and was driving across the country.
Well, and the implications with Bitcoin go even further because, like, let's say you have $50,000 in cash and you pull up to a gas station to get a candy bar. You can peel a $5 bill out of that wad of cash and go into the gas station and spend it without any issue. If self-custody if the issue around self-custody is going where I think it's going, if you go into that gas station to pay for the candy bar with Bitcoin, there's going to be a silent alarm that goes off in the background that alerts the authorities that you're trying to spend a UTXO that's not from a verified wallet. That's where I think that's headed. And so, cash is, the ultimate privacy spending tool. And, I think if people really don't stop using these centralized and these KYC services, if they keep fueling that fire, there's going to come a point where you won't be able to spend your Bitcoin at a lot of places simply because those places have decided to take the side of compliance so that they can operate as a business, and they're not going to respect your desire to use Bitcoin as a permissionless peer-to-peer transaction tool. And I think we're going to find in the near future people trying to spend Bitcoin that run into issues because it's Bitcoin that isn't from a recognized or valid address. I think that's the worst case scenario where this is going if it gets away from us.
I think what you'll see is close to that. I think, kind of like you said, there'll be a red flag going off in the background, right? That you're trying to spend from a non-registered wallet, we'll say, right? I think what you'll see that manifest as is they get that red flag. That red flag records the amount of that transaction, right? Because it's a public ledger. This much transaction. And if there's some way they can tie that to you, you're just going to get a bill in the mail. You spent X amount of money from this address, and this is what you owe us in taxes on top of what you spent because you can't prove where that money came from. There's going to be all kinds of weird attack vectors because they can't flip a switch and shut off Bitcoin. So they're going to do everything they can to hinder and control, and the people that they can't get to comply, they're going to make life as difficult as possible while still trying to get money out of you. It's too easy for them to just say, well, lock up your money and you can't use it, because then you're not paying them.
Sure. And, this is what we're talking about when we talk about parallel economies and circular economies. And, there's one or two ways this thing can go. We can either continue to compromise on compliance and, it just 2 weeks to slow the spread, over and over. It's just signing an address so that you can withdraw. That's all AOPP is. You're just signing an address so you can withdraw. Don't you understand? That helps people self-custody. If you take the AOPP out, now it's harder for people to withdraw from the exchanges. Why would you make it harder for people? So it's just this constant compromise until we find ourselves in a place where that you guys are detailing here. The other side of that, the other possibility, is that we get enough people right now that begin to see where this thing is going. The trajectory cannot be any clearer, and we begin to really separate. That's the entire point of this thing, is that it is supposed to be able to run whether they want it to or not. Does not matter. I don't care about their political good graces. I don't care about what they think somebody should or should not be doing. The whole point of all the trade-offs is that we can do it regardless. So we start building that out to where we're spending Bitcoin in a peer-to-peer fashion with people that accept Bitcoin, that use Bitcoin, that will sell you goods and services for Bitcoin. And we can route around this entire problem, but it takes more than just a few people screaming about it on Twitter. It takes actually understanding the problem. And I don't think that we will really see a major swing in this direction until we get, and people start actually getting hit over the head with this stuff. Like Econo said, when the AOPP stuff came out, it kind of knocked some people over the head. And it's just going to be the same thing when we start seeing people actually not being able to self-custody in the United States, or not being able to spend whatever. Then people just usually don't wake up until they're forced to. But when that happens, we've got to be ready.
Yeah, I'd like to see something in the fashion of Aurora Store, the same way that they kind of fuck with Google Play services to allow you to access apps that are in the Play Store, just in a wallet, acceptable wallet address fashion, right? Just kind of spoof that so that you can
signatures.
Spend. Yep. And I think, as we've seen, at least thus far, I think in Bitcoin, privacy tools have been accelerating far faster than regulation can show up. So I have hope that something like that will show up before they can implement something that can hinder us.
Yeah, for sure. So about this physical privacy thing, it helps to be a real jerk so you can run everybody else out of your house. That's step one. Step one, run everybody off. If you have no one around you to complain, it makes things easier. But no, so we're talking about this physical privacy stuff, and like you mentioned, one of the main things to really take into consideration, unless you live in like a rural area, is the noise. Because
is that fine humming in the background?
It may or may, I cannot confirm nor deny that you are hearing a humming in the background. But the noise from these things is no joke. You might think you know how loud they are, but I promise you, when you get it in your house and you fire this thing up, you have no idea. So you're going to want to be able to find a way to make that livable, depending on your situation. Everybody's got different situations. If you're in a house and you've got a basement, and you've got a shed out back or whatever, if you've got your own property, then you've got all kinds of stuff. The sky's the limit. If you are living in an apartment that's not yours and you're surrounded by other people, now what? Can you just not mine? Or are you supposed to go host with Compass now because you can't, you're living in an apartment?
Oof.
Right.
Never.
I say no. I say there's ways around all this stuff. And I'm really happy to see now some of the, what I would call bigger players in the game kind of stepping in to this area. Talking about Steve Barber and Upstream Data guys and the stuff that they're doing with the black box. I know Eco can speak to that a little bit here. I'm interested to hear his takes on it. But I'm really happy to see that this is starting to get taken much more seriously. The home mining thing is. It's no longer just, one or two people, on Twitter swearing, I swear you can home mine at home. There's like an entire movement behind it now. There's players in the game that are coming in and introducing new products to specifically help overcome the infrastructure hurdles and all these problems. So, yeah, I'd love to hear how your experience with the black box is coming along, Eco.
Yeah, dude. Just for full disclosure, I am affiliated with Upstream Data. But that aside, I am not saying this stuff. I'm not.
He's been paid to say this, just in case anybody's wondering.
Wait a minute.
No, I'm not saying it just because I'm affiliated with them. I'm saying it because it actually is this like instant problem solver. The black box is it's weatherproof, which means you don't have to keep it in your house. You don't have to bring this industrial grade ASIC into your house. You don't have to bring that heat and that noise into your house. You can leave it outside. And the black box is designed in such a way that the air has to go through this tortuous path, and that really deadens the sound as the air flows in and out of this thing. So you can put it outside, and it can be outside relatively close to your neighbors without bothering them now. And then you don't have to deal with any like ventilation infrastructure installs in your house. You don't have to punch any holes in your walls. You don't have to remove any windows. I mean, I really think for people who don't have the time, the interest, the tools, or the skills to do these do-it-yourself solutions, the black box really will help those people stay away from hosting providers and the risks involved with trusting third parties and having a hosting setup. And it'll help them not have to make modifications to their home and not have to, figure out how to develop the skills of Tim Allen to be able to build an enclosure. And they can just buy this black box, park it in their backyard, have an electrician wire up an outlet for them, and then plug in their ASICs, and they're good to go. Now, for anyone who does have the drive, the skills, the tools to do it themselves, I just put out a guide recently that takes the idea of the black box and uses a single sheet of plywood to build one yourself. I spent $150 at Home Depot, and I was able to mimic the black box in such a way that I built this enclosure that reduced the sound by 20 decibels. And if anyone's familiar with my original guide from a year ago, my first attempt at this only reduced the sound by 10 decibels, which was good. Don't get me wrong, but it was still kind of a nuisance. But at a 20 decibel reduction, I mean, this thing is like, I was blown away at how well that design, the black box design, that tortuous air path, I was totally blown away at how well that actually worked and how well it actually turned out. So, long story short, if, the black box design itself is this great problem solver. And if you want to do it yourself, those instructions are out there on GitHub. If you don't want to do it yourself, Upstream Data is selling those black boxes. They're ramping up their production, and they're going to be available. So, I mean, I just think it's a win-win, and, really something that'll help bring home mining to a lot more people that otherwise were left with, the decision of either doing it and figuring out the problems themselves or trusting a hosting service.
Yeah, and I just want to say for the people who don't know, that the example that I know of, is an S19 Pro. A friend of mine bought 3 104 terahash units, and he did like the typical, at least what I've noticed to be the typical home miner thing, right? He bought like 3 S9s, had them plugged in for like a week, and then bought 3 S19s. Now the difference in like sound for an S9 to an S19 is like a 4-cylinder Mitsubishi and a freight train. So he actually plugged in the S19 and called me on video chat from the road in front of his house in the neighborhood he lives in, and you could just hear the S19 screaming from the garage. And he was like, "Dude, I might be selling you these S19s. My wife is never gonna have this."
Oh wow!
So it's a big decibel jump when you start talking about like these new gen miners that are like, you know, they're cranking out a lot of terahash, and you start getting something that's drawing power like that and cranking out terahash like that, it's making a lot of heat, so it needs to do a lot to keep itself cool. Now I've heard that the Wutz miners are louder than the Bitmain amp miners. I'm yet to hear a Wutz miner run, but I know that even, you know, my lot is huge. I own a lot of land. It would be a problem for me to have 5 or 10 S19s running, you know, even relatively close to my house.
Sure.
Like that's a lot of noise. So there's something to be said for deadening that physical footprint. I live in a small town, but if, you know, somebody was interested and drove by and rolled the window down and I had 5 of those running in a shed, you would know. If you knew what they sounded like, you would know there was 5 of them running in a shed.
Oh yeah, these S19s are they're a big machine too. Even from the S17 to the S19, they got a decent amount bigger. And you know the S19s are a dual tube ASIC, so you have 4 fans now, 2 intake and 2 exhaust fans. Whereas with the S9 and even with the Wutz miner, they're a single tube ASIC, so you have, you know, an intake fan and an exhaust fan. So your fans are your noise essentially. So, you know, like you said, the whole goal is to try to cool these chips off. Now, if you're gonna, there's several ways you can approach this. One of the ways, as Eco has talked about, is just using this torturous path for the air, to where you can try to decrease the decibels that way. Another way, or even in conjunction, to try to get this noise down, is the cooler that you can keep the air flowing into your miner, the quieter that miner will be. Again, the whole goal is just to cool down these chips and not allow them to get too hot. So if you are able to introduce cool air to your intake and allow those fans to feed cool air over those chips, it drastically reduces the amount of RPMs that those fans have to do in order to try to circulate enough air through these machines to keep them cool. So that's kind of the approach that I have taken with my S19, is introducing cool air through it. Now, again, depending on where you live, that can be very easy for you to do. You can basically just kind of crack a window and let it suck the cold air in. Or, you know, you can do many different things, such as literally use air conditioning units in order to introduce cool air into them. There's many different ways to tackle this problem. It's just a matter of figuring out what path you want to take, and then, you know, laying out a plan of how you want to do it. Now, being in an apartment like I am now, I have neighbors, I have people around me that I can't just have this S19 just screaming constantly. Like you said, they are very loud. So right now it's not that big of a problem because it's kind of cool outside. You could just let it kind of suck the cool air in, and I can harvest the heat in order to heat my apartment. So it's a win-win. But then when it starts getting warm again, as it was, you know, towards the end of last year, then I'm going to be taking that same exact approach again. I'm just going to introduce cold air into it in order to keep those fan RPMs lower. If you can keep your fans under like 4,000 RPMs, this thing is very, very quiet. I mean, it's essentially no louder than what a regular window air conditioning unit is. When it kicks that compressor on, those things can get quite loud as well. It's basically quieter than that if you can keep your fans lower than 4,000 RPM. So there's many different ways to tackle this problem, and you could combine those two things. You can use this black box type design to make a difficult path for the air to travel and introduce cool air into it, and then you can just increasingly deaden this noise. But the point of the matter is, noise is one of the things that is definitely going to be a physical privacy concern, because if you live somewhere, like you said, somebody understands what this sound is, or even if they don't understand what the sound is, if there's something that loud running in your home, there's a reason for it. And nosy people are going to be nosy. So it's one of those things where you've got to be able to secure your unit. Like we were talking about placing, even with this black box, even being able to place it outside. There's, depending on where you live, there's other than physical security risks that you have to take into consideration. So all these things have to be considered, but none of them are so horrendous that they can't be overcome with a little bit of ingenuity, and again with these new products that are being introduced, to where we can deaden this noise and find a way to deal with the heat, whether that's pumping it outside or harvest, or increasingly now I'm seeing more and more people harvest this heat and heat their homes with them. All these things are able to be overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm personally I don't know if I want to just blanket statement and say I'm a basement maxi, but I'm an underground coolness maxi.
Yeah.
I heat my house with S9s, and the S9s that are heating my house, you can't hear them. They're quieter than my four-star air system if my four-star air system is running. Because it's, high 40s, low 50s in my basement in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
The air they're taking in, I got them running on 220, and they're running 1,500 watts a piece on S9s. Now that in August, those things are fucking loud. Like, they're only S9s, but they're loud when they're creating that much heat. So to be able to have cool air coming in, they're so much quieter. And the T2Ts that I got, which are 30 terahash, in a warm environment, they're considerably louder than the S9s. But if I'm pulling cold air into them, they're near silent. They just run at a hum. I know me and Akano had talked about, when I was designing the mine in my yard, we had talked about a design where there's a house design called, and I might butcher this, I think Akano knows more about it than I do, called Project Earthship or Mother Earthship, some kind of house. What's that called?
You got it right. It's the Earthships.
Earthship. So it's like a house design that uses minimal impact on the environment. They use parts of the environment to create a home, right? But the thing that I took away from that is their intake for air into that structure is a long tube that runs underground and has a vent that pulls 50 or 60 yards away from the house. Mm-hmm. So it pulls warm outside air in and then cools it with the ground before it reaches the structure. Mm-hmm. So there's like a lot of creative things you can come up with to cool that air.
Sure.
I think that's one of the easiest things to address as far as dampening sound is if you can figure out a way to cool your intake.
Yeah, definitely. And you've also got to keep in consideration not only like neighbors and would-be thieves or whatever, but actually like literal government agencies and police, because Bitcoin miners or Bitcoin mines give off an eerily similar fingerprint to indoor marijuana grow facilities. The fingerprints are eerily similar, and you'll notice if you start getting around this Bitcoin mining stuff and buying, buying stuff for your mine, you'll end up noticing that a lot of the stuff that you'll buy will probably be coming from, like grow facilities, and there are things that are designed for indoor growing. So there's a very good chance that the police are, they have their eye on the fact that there's an awful lot of energy being used in this home, and there's an awful lot of heat coming. There's a big heat signature right here. What exactly is going on? We've seen several times where police have went in fully believing that they were going in to bust an indoor marijuana operation and finding Bitcoin miners running.
Yep.
I think Adam even had that from, he's with Upstream too, right? I think he even said that the cops came in on him because they noticed his outdoor exhaust and all the different things, So this signature, it's one that gives off, it's something that people notice, and not only, like I said, thieves and things, but we're even talking about government agencies here, and so that's something to take into consideration on down the road, when, as we were talking about earlier, protecting yourself, your network traffic, because the environment might turn adversarial. The same thing, the same considerations need to be taken for the heat and the power consumption, which is why I'm a big fan of, very small, scattered Bitcoin mines. Not the single point of failure, the one place with the multiple miners running, but having several small areas with a couple, one or two ASICs running in them to kind of keep this signature spread over a large distance. All those things are considerations for a possible adversarial future.
Yeah, and I think even though mining isn't illegal, there's nothing illegal about it. I just think that it's a very based on the trajectory that we're on the last couple of years, and I guess my level of paranoia, I just kind of default to not talking about my Bitcoin mining to anyone that I meet in real life. So like I'm talking like my neighbors, or someone I meet at the coffee shop, or even the utility provider when I was talking to them about a service upgrade. I just really try to be cautious and not tell anybody that I'm mining Bitcoin. And it's not because I'm doing anything illegal. It's just that I think in the near future, it's going to be a very hot topic. And I don't know if that's going to be because it gets attached to alt-right domestic extremism, or if it gets attached to tax evasion, or if it gets attached to like environmental issues. Whatever the case may be, there's just too many slippery slopes around me to be telling everybody I meet that I'm mining Bitcoin. So I just try to, urge people to be careful about what they say. And, if they're looking for excuses when they're talking to their utility provider about getting an upgrade, like for example, when I talked to mine, I just told them that I was running some very high powered computers in a type of like data center setup, and that I was hosting these computers for other people. And so, usually when you say something like data center, the utility worker or the utility engineer you're speaking to, that's close enough to what you're really doing to give them an idea and to fill in enough blanks for them that they can still like work on designing your circuit with you to be safe without completely exposing everything that you're doing. I just think as soon as you say the word Bitcoin, you can't take that back once you put it out there, and you just don't know what lies ahead around the next corner, and you don't know what the people around you are going to remember, and you don't know what they're going to think. And the other piece of that is, as economic hardships hit more and more people, like a lot of people out there are going to be suffering and they're going to be hurting. And if they remember that you were mining Bitcoin and we got a big swing to the upside, and they see that in the headlines, I think that could potentially put a target on your back too with the people around you in your town. So I'm just not comfortable enough with how uncertain the future is to be telling everybody around me that I have Bitcoin and that I'm mining Bitcoin. And the other thing is that I urge people to keep firearms at home and to protect themselves with firearms too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to dox who it is, but there's somebody who is in the Bitcoin space that I've built, you know, a passing relationship with, we'll say, that we were talking about this subject, and they said that they've had law enforcement come to their house a dozen times. He's like, every year, at least once a year, they come by, they knock on the door, they think I'm growing. He's like, it's gotten to the point that they've come so many times that when they knock on the door, I just open the door and start walking towards the mine to like show them what I have, because the helicopters fly overhead with the heat sensing cameras, and there's a shed in the backyard, and the shed in the backyard is glowing like the sun.
Right.
You know, they're coming and they're knocking on the door, and they want to know what you're doing, and they want to see what you're doing and make sure that, you know, you're not growing 40 pounds of opium in the backyard.
Yeah, I mean, if that happened to me, I mean, I'm gonna make them produce a warrant. I'm not gonna just give them unwarranted access to my property. I'm not going to consent to search and seizure of my property. But you know, every person has to kind of make that determination on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess the point of me saying that was it's not a theoretical thing that could happen. That there are people
Right.
who are home miners who have experienced this, who have experienced law enforcement showing up repeatedly and saying, "What are you doing? You know, we have such and such evidence that there's something going on here." You know, like Diverter was saying, it's not hard for them to add up, hey, your meter's spinning off the side of your house and there's a big heat signature at your house. You know, the first place a cop's mind goes is you're growing.
That's what we grow. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, so like this can, and everybody's going to be different depending on just the size of the mine you run, whether you're, you know, operating 5 or 10, you know, S19s and M30s and all that, or whether you've got a single one. You know, it makes a big difference. So like with a single S19, you know, you can plug it in place of a dryer or in place of an oven. And you know, for the most part, you can kind of fly under the radar like that. When you start adding more machines in, then it just becomes another thing that needs to be taken into consideration. Often the physical aspect of privacy is very often overlooked and not discussed very much, especially in our type of spaces. We're usually talking about digital privacy and network privacy. So it's not very often that we start getting into the actual physical privacy, because, you know, we're talking about digital money. So when you get into the actual mining process, so like these are actual physical machines with a very distinct heat and noise fingerprint, and it's something that is going to have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and I just want to reinforce what you just said there and make it clear to anybody that listens to this that when you're talking about drawing attention, we're talking about a relatively larger setup in the scope of home mining, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about 5, 8, 10 new gen miners.
Right.
This is when you got to start worrying about.
Yeah. When you start melting power lines to your house.
When you start melting the overhead.
I mean, who would do such a thing, you know?
My bad.
Right. When you start creating your own circuits inside the meter socket, you know what I mean?
What kind of jackass melts his own power? You know, like.
You know, I'm not an electrician, but I do know enough to be dangerous.
I'm not an electrician, but I know enough to burn my house down.
Know enough to get myself killed. That's exactly what they used to say about guys that used to work with us. They used to say, you know, he knows just enough about it to get himself killed. Yeah, that's exactly the problem.
But it's so true. I mean, it's always, no matter the size of your build, it's always a good idea to try to make that build as covert as possible. In my experience, you start mining and you kind of get the bug And you're always looking at ways to either maybe expand your mining setup or get a more efficient miner to get more, you want more hash. So it's a good idea from the get-go to kind of approach it from the perspective of, hey, I kind of want to try to make this as limited noise as possible, as limited heat as possible, to kind of mitigate my heat, direct it where I want it to go, because it's easier to scale in that fashion rather than say, oh, it's not a big deal because it's just one S9. And then, a year later, you have 2 or 3 new gen miners and you're like, okay, now it's a big deal and I have no concept of how to attack it. So if you can start off from the right perspective and attack it from that idea, then that can kind of scale with you as you attempt to grow, your mining up.
Yeah, you start with a small operation, and your problems are also small, and you figure out how to solve those problems. And then as your operation grows bigger, your problems grow bigger, and you're better equipped to handle those.
More money, more problems.
That's right.
Well, in this setup, more hash, more problems.
There it is.
But yeah, I mean, I think that those are good starting points, right? You talk about something to deaden the noise, and I think really a good first avenue to address that is really the temperature of the intake air. And if you can't do that because of location, then trying to create a complex path for the air coming in and the air going out to really deaden that noise. Mm-hmm. I mean, what's your guys' take as far as heat mitigation outside of recycling it to heat a structure? Say you're talking to somebody who's in a warmer climate.
I mean, get it away from the miner. It's actually it's very simple, but it not necessarily easy. Just because something's simple doesn't mean it's easy sometimes. If I were to place and have to, decide which is more important, to have cool air coming in or to get my hot air away, I would place the emphasis on getting my hot air away over getting cool air in. Heat is just such a killer in so many different ways. So, depending on where you live, what your circumstances are, what you are able to do, or what you're able to manufacture or modify in your residence, that may mean needing to introduce some inline duct fans, which are not a big deal. They're relatively cheap. They're very easy to install. And they make a drastic difference in being able to evacuate this hot air away from your ASIC. So the less you make your exhaust fans work, the better, again, all around it is, from sound to operation of the machine, to making sure that you don't get these chips too hot. And you want to make sure that you increase the longevity of your machine as much as possible. And I think one of the keys to doing that is to not let them get overheated. So, inline fans are major pieces of the puzzle here, in my opinion. But just it's a very simple. Most of this stuff is like a very simple concept. You want cold in, hot out, and the hot out is in my opinion more important than the cool in. But you just need to clear it out, whether that be outside, whether you're harvesting it, whatever you're doing, get it away from the machine.
Yeah, and there's like Crypto Cloaks and there's a bunch of other people out there too that are like printing those 3D printed shrouds that will attach to the end of the ASIC, and then you can like fasten like 8 or 6 inch duct to the shroud, and then that way you've got your hot air contained, and you can direct it away from the machine and out your window or into your HVAC system. But at least it's not like heating up the air that is being used to circulate and go to the intake side of your machine.
Yeah, that's right. Keep that ambient air down. And these duct shrouds are super easy to install. I mean, they use the same exact screws that your fans already use. So there's no like additional drilling or no modifications that you have to do. It's very simple. You just take the screws out, put the duct shroud on, screw it back on, boom, you're done. And now you have full control over where this air is going, instead of having, this hot air and water are basically this, the same type of thing. They're always going to find a way. They're going to find a crack. They're going to find a way to hang around. They're going to take the path of least resistance. So if you could put one of these good duct shrouds on and really take a hold of where this air is going, you can basically, the world is your oyster after that.
Yeah, I think it was Bitcoin Rail that I was talking to about it. He was talking about it in an immersion context, but I think the same principle applies here. Is when it comes to noise, the way to mitigate noise is really to do your best to create a static environment for the chips.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can figure out a way, whether it be a combination of making sure you're evacuating heat efficiently and making sure you're introducing sufficiently cool air, you want to kind of try to create this static environment for the chips where the temperature inside the ASIC isn't really changing. It kind of gets up to temperature and it stays at that temperature, and you have your fans, like you said, running below 4,000 RPM. Whatever it takes to do that, that's kind of the environment that you want to create for that miner. It gives you the longevity on your machinery, it gives you noise reduction, it gives you heat reduction, because whatever your output is what your output is. It's not fluctuating, it's not getting hotter and cooler and hotter and cooler.
Yeah, but like you said, even if you're not able to get these fans down like under 4,000 RPMs or whatever, even if you're running at a pretty high rate, say you're even running at like 5,500 RPMs, as you just said, if that is a static sound, if those fans are unchanging, then your hearing perception of that it's essentially going to be white noise. It's going to blend into the background. When those fans start changing speeds, that's when you hear it. That's when all of a sudden it gets much louder, and you get a different speed on your intake and a different speed on your exhaust. And whenever it's going up and down, that all those sounds are very noticeable. But whenever you're, like you said, you've got a static environment that you've introduced to where the machines can run at a set rate, all this stuff is basically just becomes white noise.
Yeah, and I think a big factor of noise pollution, and a thing that I don't want to say it's probably not super obvious to somebody who hasn't run them or is thinking about running them. A big noise factor is that spool, right? So your ASIC is running, your chip temperature is 85 Celsius, everything's running great. And then, you don't have this static environment and that temperature starts climbing. You have your back end set to say, hey, 90 degrees is a problem, right? 90 Celsius is a problem. So that chip temperature will climb until it hits 90, and then your fans are going to spool. And when they spool, they don't go from 3,000 RPM to 4,000 RPM to try to cool themselves. They go from 3,000 RPM to maximum RPM to try to cool themselves, and then they come down. So that loud spool that you have from 0 to 100 trying to cool itself until it's where it wants to be, and then it spools back down, like you said, that's 90% of your noise pollution.
Mm-hmm.
What was that setup that you had built, Akano? How was that? It wasn't an inline fan, right? That vertical setup that you had built?
Well, and yeah, so this is like another design that I keep seeing more iterations of out there. The basic concept there is you have multiple ASICs that are all pushing the exhaust air into a large chamber, and then that chamber is being evacuated by like either a gable fan or like some sort of inline fan. But it's different than like earlier iterations of the setups where like each individual ASIC had its own run of ductwork. So, in the setup I built, I just built a small frame, and then I was able to stand up 8 ASICs on end next to each other, and I built a pressure barrier so it was airtight around the body of the ASIC, and that separated the intake side and the exhaust side of the ASIC. And so the exhaust was all dumping into this large chamber, and then I had like a, I don't know, 14, 15-inch gable fan in the windowsill where the window was in the basement. I had put a gable fan in there, and then that gable fan just sucked all the hot air out of that chamber and exhausted it to atmosphere. And so I've seen a few different iterations of that. People are building like, these large like square boxes. I saw a guy put one in his shed. I've seen a couple in garages now. And I think that works better. I think it's less infrastructure requirements than trying to run like individual ducts if you have several ASICs that you're trying to juggle.
Yeah, and that the gable fan kind of helps to, the only thing you're really relying on the ASIC is the intake fan. That gable fan kind of is a huge assist to the exhaust fans in evacuating that heat, right? That's what we've talked about. The most important thing you can get to is getting the heat away from the ASIC. I know when I was talking to you and Bitcoin Rail about how I wanted to design my setup, you guys both stressed that to me, that, don't worry so much about the intake. Just worry about getting the heat the hell out of the building. Right. So if you can get the heat out of the building and away from the ASICs, then, then they're not working as hard.
Right.
And that's, I honestly think that's a big reason that a lot of people have started to recycle the heat and use it to heat their house, because it's such a convenient way to disperse of that heat, right? I know in my house, without heat running, and I have the ASICs running, they run at a constant hum. They never spool because it has 900 square feet for the heat to dissipate into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's another advantage there that, you're spending a lot on electricity to run that ASIC. And suddenly, if you are harvesting that heat, then you don't have to spend any money or as much money with whatever heating method you were using prior to that to heat up your house. So you're saving some there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, gentlemen, we're right about at the 2-hour mark. Kind of closing thoughts, I guess, from both of you.
Well, we didn't even get into on-chain privacy.
Hey, listen, I'm not in a rush. If you guys want to talk about something else, I was trying to be courteous.
He's right. It's hashtag whirlpool it all, though. I mean,
yeah, actually, yeah. Let's talk about that real quick before we shut this down. Right? There's a myth that goes around that I believed for a long time until Diverter set me straight. That. Oh, I'm mining Bitcoin, so the Bitcoin that I'm getting from my miner running in my basement is coming straight from the Coinbase transaction, and it's fresh, clean Bitcoin, has never seen action before.
Yeah, clean Bitcoin. Yep. That's the big story, and I want to mine fresh, clean coins. I think everybody has this idea that they're going to mine these fresh, clean Bitcoins, and then there's going to be like a market down the road, for Bitcoins, UTXOs with no transaction history, that they'll go for an elevated price. I've seen this story multiple times. Supposedly there's actually a market for it in Asia somewhere, but I have yet to see any actual evidence for that. But point being, that's a common misconception that when you're mining Bitcoin, that the block reward is coming out and you're getting paid from that block reward. So you've got a fresh UTXO. The fact is, though, when you start actually getting paid in Bitcoin, if you plug these transactions into a block explorer, you can see very quickly that there's a really good chance. First of all, you probably didn't even get paid out from a block reward UTXO. Real good chance of that. Real good chance that you got paid out from a UTXO that's been used several times by this mining pool. There's nothing in there, there's no like contract between you and the pool that says that you will only receive these Coinbase transactions. They're going to send you whatever they owe you from whatever UTXOs they've got. They don't care. That's number one. Number two, even more than that, when we get into this concept of clean or dirty and tainted Bitcoin, you quickly run into a lot of problems with that, because at the end of the day, either it's all tainted or none of it is. The way that these mining pools collect the block rewards, there's actually, there's the block reward subsidy. There's the subsidy, which is right now 6.25 Bitcoin. And then there are the transaction fees. And what all these major mining pools do is they combine those two amounts together, and then they'll pay you out from that. Now, there is maybe a case to be made, maybe, that the subsidy itself could be a quote unquote clean Bitcoin that has nothing with it if it was separated off, just that 6.25 by itself. And then you were just to get paid out from that 6.25 solely to your own address. Maybe that we could have an argument, but that's just not how it works. And truthfully, I mean, if any transaction in that block came from a quote unquote dirty address or a dirty UTXO, then the transaction fees had to be paid from those dirty UTXOs, or those dirty addresses. That's where the transaction fees had to come from. So then by taking those transaction fees and mixing them all together and paying you out with them, have you not in some way tainted all of the payout addresses then? I mean, it may be, you may say, okay, well, that's just, 0.0001%, but the fact remains, it's either all tainted or none of it is. So I believe this whole clean coin thing is actually just a myth in and of itself, especially the way things are currently operated. But more direct than that is the fact that very few of these pools are going to pay you out from a block reward. There are pools like Laurentia pool, which pays out direct from the Coinbase reward, but that's a pool that you have to sign up and commit like a certain amount of hash to it. And some miners, because of the firmware, have a problem hooking up to it. Like it's not like hooking up to like Slush Pool, for example.
It's a large amount of hash requirement too, if I remember correctly.
Right. It's not just like, you're throwing 50 terahash at Slush Pool. It's like not exactly the same thing. But the fact remains, it exists. So the payout structure exists. And I do believe at some point we're probably going to see people get forced to a similar type payout structure. I've said this many times before. I'll say it again, because I believe there's a lot of meat on the regulatory bone when it comes to these mining pools. Because the fact is, when you're contributing hash to these mining pools and you're earning this Bitcoin, the Bitcoin that's being mined goes into the wallets of the mining pool. And then the mining pool sends those funds from their wallet to your wallet. So there is they have custody of your funds. So I think there's a real good case to be made that these regulators are eventually going to get around to making, of basically classifying these mining pools as money transmitters, and then likely trying to enforce KYC on anyone hooking up to their mining pool, if I was to guess where it was going to go, so that they, that income can be accounted for. But point of all that being, you're not getting clean, quote unquote, clean or fresh Bitcoin from your mining reward. I mean, just plug any of your payouts into a block reward and you'll see it for yourselves. So what do we do about this? What does that mean? Does that mean, everything's screwed up? I don't think it really matters at all. Regardless, even if you were getting clean coins, quote unquote, I still personally would not want my mining pool that just paid me out to then be able to just freely watch as I do whatever I do with my funds. I want to break that transaction history link so that they cannot see what I do once they pay me. My boss at work doesn't get to follow me around and watch where I spend all my money whenever I get paid. I don't want the mining pool to be able to do the same thing. Also, on the other side of that, the person that you're paying these funds to, I don't necessarily want them to know that I'm mining Bitcoin either. Like Econo Alchemist talked about earlier, he doesn't go around telling everybody he mines Bitcoin. Neither do I. So it's all a matter of protecting yourself and just kind of doing away with this myth of these clean coins that you're mining, especially as like a small home miner. Like if you're a huge, big mining farm, then maybe you can work something out with the pool to try to get you some clean coins or whatever you want to call them. But if you're just like a small, miner at home plugging in an ASIC or two and firing some hash at a pool, you can forget about the clean coin thing.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much said it all.
Don't do that to me. Don't do that to me, Eco. Eco had a great presentation on this at Bear Arms and Bitcoin last year, by the way.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that you said. I don't necessarily the big issue for me is spending the Bitcoin down the road and having someone look at that and knowing that I mine. And that's just because I think we're on so many different slippery slopes at the same time right now. And and the future's uncertain, and I have put myself in a position where I am, I don't have a fiat job anymore. I am like fully committed to living on the Bitcoin standard. And as such, I have a lot to lose if I make a mistake in my privacy that ends up putting me in a position where I inadvertently reveal details about my private life that I don't want revealed. So, that's why I take this stuff so seriously. And I think it would behoove a lot of home miners to also take it seriously too, because you really do have an immense amount of power as an individual when you plug that ASIC in and you start mining Bitcoin and earning that non-KYC Bitcoin and having it deposited into a wallet that you have unrestricted control over, and the ability to spend that money permissionlessly. There's a lot of power in that. And if I've learned anything in the last couple of years, it's that there's a lot of people out there that don't want me to have any power over making decisions for myself. They don't even want me to be able to decide what chemicals I put in my body or not. And so it's not a stretch of the imagination to imagine a near future where people take issue with how you want to spend your money. And, if you have that power, people are going to want to take it from you. So I urge people to take the steps now, hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst, because I think it's coming.
Yeah. And I think there's a misconception that, that this stuff gets done out of fear. And there's a very, very fine, blurry line between, bravery and stupidity. To me, the man running around in the middle of no man's land between the fences during trench warfare, that's not a brave man. That's a stupid man. He's not protecting himself at all. He's not doing anything. He's just running out there hoping he doesn't get shot. Well, if you're going to get shot, if we're in right now, we're in sort of a kind of like, I feels like we're in a type of like trench warfare. I mean, both sides are kind of digging their trenches as we speak. We're kind of all preparing for this inevitable conflict that everyone sees coming. Some people don't want to talk about it. Some people do, but it's almost palpable in the air these days. Like you can just feel it. Just look at this trucker convoy. Just look at this Joe Rogan stuff. It's everywhere. It's all around us. It's almost an inevitable conflict that everybody sees. But if you talk about it and talk about preparing for it, then, you're seen as crazy, or you're fudding, or, or whatever, you're crazy right wing, or whatever the case may be. And it's just a matter of protecting yourself and the ones that you care about. And it doesn't take fear to do that. It doesn't mean you're afraid because you're doing that. It means that you're intelligent enough to recognize the threat, and you are preparing yourself to have the ability to deal with that threat.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same idea. It's along the same principled lines as, having a firearm to protect your family or to protect your property.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
There it is.
I joke about it with my wife, but at the same time, it's semi-serious. It's like, I laugh about, especially in my small town, right? I laugh about like our police department, right? We got like, I don't know, a dozen police officers or something. It's like, I've lived in this particular town for a good majority of my life. I don't think I've ever relied on the police for anything. They've never done anything that's benefited me, right? They've written me tickets. But I say that to say, if somebody kicks my front door in and wants to harm my family or steal from us, my first thought isn't I'm going to pick up the phone and call the cops and they're going to protect me. By the time they get here, the person who's intending to do me harm is long gone.
It's already over. Yeah.
Right. So it's the same, it's the same principle and the same concept that applies to the privacy end of Bitcoin. It's like, I would rather take all these extra steps and never have the day come where I need it.
That's exactly right. The thing is, like, if we're wrong, say we're wrong, right? And none of this stuff ever matters. What's the consequence of that? Honestly, like maybe you could say we have 1% or 2% less Bitcoin, but even that's not really true if you're mining Bitcoin, especially right now, because most likely you're mining at a substantially lower than the market rate. So it's a good chance we actually ended up with more Bitcoin than the people buying on KYC exchanges, truth be told. There was a study done by Blockware Solutions a few years back that showed that exact thing from a different, the last epoch. So what is the consequence of us being wrong about this and there being, nothing, no conflict, no adversarial environment? Then what? Well, we just hit hyper Bitcoinization and we start spending our Bitcoin, right? What's the problem? But what if we're not? What if we're not wrong? And what if exactly what we think is going to happen or something along those same lines is coming? And your gamble is that we're just fudding. We're just crazy conspiracy theorists. Now, what's the consequences of that? That's a big deal. That's a problem. And it's not the same thing as like a Pascal's wager, where you're talking about whether or not God exists, but you're going to be religious because just in case God does exist, you're okay. It's not the same thing because we're not in a situation where we don't know for sure whether or not this thing exists. We know for sure. We watch it every day. We watch things like this GoFundMe thing happen. We watch things like, censorship, like the dude on BlockFi that had his account shut down because he had tried to enter some Bitcoin that came from BISC and a mixing service. Like it's really there. It's already happening. So it's not like we're just guessing randomly and in the dark. Like, I don't know, maybe this thing could come. I mean, it's already happening. So when you take these steps, it ensures that even if you're completely wrong, so what? Who cares? Like, you're out nothing. But if we're right and you haven't taken any of these steps, sorry.
Then you're out of everything.
You're out of everything. It's over.
Yeah.
You're not able.
These tools exist for a reason. Samurai Wallet didn't go and build Whirlpool because they were bored. They did it because there's like a real world need for it. And all the privacy tools are like that. All of those things are there for a reason. And it's up to the end user to decide to put in the effort and to make those incremental steps to start using those tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And I think I could probably pretty confidently speak for me and Eco both here when we say that when we talk about obfuscating our Bitcoin trails, our transaction histories. That what we're talking about is using Samurai's Whirlpool. That's the tool that we go to. It's non-custodial. It's easy to use. It is a proper implementation of the zero link Chromium blinded coin join. It's the real deal. It's available now in Samurai Wallet. It has now been implemented as well in Sparrow desktop wallet. So Samurai is an Android only wallet, but if you're an iPhone user, you're in luck. You've got a desktop application with Sparrow that you can still use this amazing tool. I hope to see more wallets implemented in the future. It's built specifically so that Whirlpool can be implemented into more wallets and just deepen that liquidity pool. So it's a very, very powerful tool that I feel like everybody should at least familiarize themselves with, understand a little bit about how it works and what it's doing, and how to use it to protect yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are big on Samurai. Personally, I'm a Wasabi Maxi.
I didn't know that.
I'm just kidding. Fuck
Podcast
Wasabi.
over? What was
that? No, but it's
you had me.
Yeah. you don't have to know exactly how all of it works in the background when it comes to Whirlpool, right?
It's kind of
hey,
the point.
you know, Mario Andretti doesn't have to be a good mechanic to be a good driver.
There you go. Yeah,
exactly
right.
There's plenty of things people use that they don't understand the inner workings of. 90% of what you interact with on a daily basis. It's actually funny you mentioned Joe Rogan for a second. Not that I don't give a shit about what's going on with him now, but he had a stand-up years ago where he used to talk about if all the smart people in the world died, we'd all be fucked. Like if the guy that invents, the guy that builds cell phones dies, we're fucked. Do you know how a cell phone works? I don't know how a fucking cell phone works. I know I turn it on and it fucking works. Like it was kind of dumbed down, but it was like, he's absolutely right. It's the same thing with a lot of things you interact with. Like a lot of things you interact with, you have no fucking idea how they work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, who understands the fiat system that they're interacting with right now? Who knows?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
How many people know that when they use that credit card, that's not actually getting cash finality to that settlement? You know what I mean? That there's multiple layers that this thing has to go through before it's even settled. Like nobody gets this shit, but they use it. And Samurai specifically, it's why I love it so much. One of the reasons why I love it so much, what I'm fond of saying, is that they put up guardrails, pretty high guardrails, to try to keep you from driving yourself off the cliff and not realizing that you're shooting yourself in the foot. There's multiple pop-up warnings that will show in the app if you're about to do something stupid. They'll kind of pop up and say, "Hey, you sure you want to do this, dummy?" And they default to the best sane defaults that you can do. Like they actively do things to try to just guide you and nudge you towards better privacy without you even realizing that they're doing it. Things like receiving your change to a like type address. How many people actually think of that? Like when they're spending from a Betch32 address, a BC1Q address, and they're spending to an address that starts with a 3. So when you do that, one of the blockchain surveillance heuristics is that if you spend from a BC1 address to a 3 address, then you're going to have 2 outputs on that other side. The 3 output, and then you're going to have your change that's going to come back to that same type you just spent from, the BC1. That's very easy to understand which one is the payment, which one is the change. Samurai does this where when you spend to a 3 address, your change that comes back to your wallet automatically comes back to a 3 address as well. So now when you look at that transaction, it's much more difficult to tell, well, which one is the payment, which one is the change. Little stuff like that probably 99% of people don't even think about, but they do. So it's important to have tools like this that exist and put them in the hands of people that may not even know they need them right now. But because they're using this powerful tool, they're protected without even realizing it.
my experience is Samurai does a very good job of just in the app, like you said, cues that show up do a very good job of having light, digestible explanations as to what is happening when you click something. Like when I touch this option and I use this option, it gives you a pretty dumbed down explanation of what exactly is happening when you use that. Which I think is miles ahead of any other wallet that I've used.
Well, I think what a lot of wallets do is they try to take that stuff away from the user. And the thought is, if we take all this stuff away and we just put it all in the background and nobody ever has to see it, that's kind of how like the fiat stuff works. They take all this stuff out, and so you don't actually understand what's going on. But with Bitcoin, I believe, and I think the Samurai guys believe the same thing as well. It's important actually for people to understand what is happening with this Bitcoin thing. We don't want to take too much of it out of the user's vision, because we want users to understand, that Bitcoin is built on UTXOs, a UTXO model, that you don't just have an account that all this stuff sits in. We want people to understand these things. And so they try to walk this line between, a good user experience while also not taking so much away that the user doesn't understand that they're even using Bitcoin. So it's a powerful tool. It's obviously continuing to get better. It's not done. It's not perfect, but it just feels to me like they're working on problems that other people don't even think are problems, and they're already developing tools for it. So it just feels like when you're using this tool, it feels like you're just ahead of the game by a mile.
I kind of touched on this last week with Max, but I had no idea what change was from a transaction, and I had called somebody that I am friends with, that I had met through Bitcoin Twitter, and I was like, I think I paid like a $200 to something ridiculous, and the change output was like $1,400. So it was a big UTXO, and I was like, where the fuck is this money? Like, I just noticed it in Blue Wallet that it was like, it said like change, right? I'm like reading through all this shit that's gibberish to me at the time, and it says change output, and it was like I said, like $1,300 or something. And I was like, where the fuck is this money? Am I gonna get it back? I'm not seeing it in my account. Like freaking out because the wallet interface doesn't tell me anything. It just tries to shove all that shit in the background, like you said, right? Oh, push this button and it'll do what you want it to do. But then you start reading through and you get, it's easy to get upset about things that you don't understand when trying to look through things that aren't being explained to you.
I've had so many moments like that where I just like, I thought I like deleted my Bitcoin or something, like when I was starting out, and and that's how you learn. But I remember like one of the first threads I did on Samurai Wallet, I didn't really understand the concept of toxic change, and when I got the pop-up in the wallet to mark the toxic change as unspendable, I agreed to that, not really understanding what that meant. And then I didn't see that change in my deposit wallet any longer. And at the time, it was something small, like $65 worth of Bitcoin. I don't remember the exact amount, but I remember like mentioning that in my thread, like, the toxic change got marked as unspendable and now it's gone. And, that was like a $65 lesson for me. And Samurai Wallet replied to me, and he said, you go to this menu option and then you can make it spendable again and it'll show up in your wallet. And I just remember this overwhelming feeling of relief, being able to gain control over that $65 again.
That I didn't rob myself of $65 in the process.
Yeah.
Like the wallet's great, but it cost me $65 to transact, so it's kind of sucked.
But I think everyone kind of has to experience those like, oh shit moments. And that's something you're not going to forget, right? You're not going to forget those lessons, and you're going to get to the bottom of an explanation, and you're going to remember that for next time. So I think it's okay for people to freak themselves out a little bit.
Yeah, the oh shit moments are the moments that tell you inside your head, hey, maybe I should take the time to learn about, a little bit more about what's happening here.
Right.
So I understand what's going on. You know what I mean? Those are the moments that I learn from. I'm not somebody who's big on like learning unless it's like forced upon me, right? Like a situation arises like that, right? A situation arises, I need to understand ABC to understand what just happened, or it's something that I can apply in my life that makes a difference to my life. Those are the things that motivate me to really learn about something, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That being said, now we're at 2.5 hours. So
this is Eco's fault.
Yeah.
We were all ready to go. He wanted to talk about Whirlpool.
Oh man, we haven't even gotten an ASIC boost yet, guys.
Listen, here we go.
No, I'm joking.
Gotta refill my coffee.
Hey, how great was that Eco and Luke interaction on Twitter? I've had a couple of those myself, and it is something to behold to see this narrative just be so hard to let go of, because and it's never fails. It's always from people that have been in the space for a very long time, that are generally speaking very knowledgeable about the Bitcoin protocol, about all kinds of stuff. They could tell you everything there is to know about it, but will just plainly say, hey, here's you can't mine at home. It just can't be done. It's unless you've got free power. And it's like, dude, that's not. I don't understand what you. It's not true though. I mean, you understand that's like demonstrably false. And here is the evidence. And here is the evidence to show you that it's demonstrably false. And still not let it go. It's like, it's amazing to me. I don't understand where the short. There's a short somewhere in there where it's not letting them get over this hump where they got burned in the past, because whatever, ASICs were just now hitting the market, and so difficulty was just on a tear, and pre-orders, they pre-ordered a machine, and by the time the machine actually made it to them, difficulty had already 3x, and now they were, they couldn't mine profitably, and it's like they had a bad experience, and so they cannot let that go.
Right.
It's just so interesting to watch it and just to see the way that I don't know, they're just stuck on it.
Yeah, man, it was something else, being in that argument with him, or that dialogue with him. I thought it was just a dialogue up until the point where he said I was trying to scam people. And then
that one really got me. Yeah.
Well, you do work for Upstream. I'm just saying, you have invested interests. Disclaimer. Buy a black box.
Yeah, I just don't understand how, like, in the face of what I think is like one of the hottest movements in Bitcoin in the last couple of years, the home mining renaissance. Like, and maybe I'm just biased because I've got like a front row seat to all the action, but it just seems like there have been, it seems like I personally have spoken to thousands of people in DMs, like helping get them started either on Telegram or on Twitter. And not only that, but like all the other people you see like posting their progress that like I have never even spoken to before. And it just seems like this whole home mining movement has taken on a life of its own. And no one can ignore that. You can't tell me that like Luke Dash Jr. hasn't seen them or hasn't noticed the activity around home mining. And despite that, to come back and say, no, it doesn't work. It's not profitable. And then to just completely disregard fact after fact, it's completely mind-boggling.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, and like you said, there's been this renaissance, this renewed excitement around home mining that's just been amazing to see. It's been I can't even describe the feeling of remembering how it was just a year and a half, 2 years ago, and the narrative was completely different, and that denial, that factual statement of it can't be done profitably was just taken as fact. There was no pushback, and there wasn't anybody that had any sort of, for lack of a better word, clout, any sort of pull in the community to be able to say, hey, no, wait a minute, that's not true. And now to be able to see that even somebody as influential as Luke has been to Bitcoin in its history, and I mean, he has done some of the things that when we look back on, or he's been there for some of the biggest moments in Bitcoin's history, to now still be coming along and just putting out these just horrible takes. Okay, fine, you put out a bad take, but at least now there are people out there that are not standing for it anymore. And it's just like, no, that's not true. Here's the truth. Maybe it's not profitable for everybody. Maybe it's not something that everybody should be doing the way that we encourage everyone to run a node. We may not encourage every single person to also be mining. But the fact is, it can be quite profitable, and it can be a very good and worthwhile endeavor for many, many people. So these blanket statements are just not going to work anymore. And
Right.
I can't explain how happy that makes me.
You were the spark that started this fire, man.
Well,
Hashtag diverters tips.
I mean, seriously, it really is. It's an amazing thing. If you guys, I don't know if you've ever, like, you know how it is. I mean, you put something out into the wild and you just don't know if, like, it's just going to fall flat, or like nobody's going to care, or is anybody going to read it, or whatever. And then to see somebody pick up on it and it like actually make a difference to them, and then that continue, and they put something out that makes a difference in somebody else's life, and then it just picks up this head of steam that's just unstoppable.
Yep.
It's truly amazing to watch.
The bromance is thick right now.
I'm telling you, that's my dude, man. This is the first. Hey, he's the first follower, bro. If you've ever seen that video, the first follower, that makes the movement.
Yeah, that video explains that whole concept really well.
Yeah, it's awesome. You know what we're talking about, LC? The first follower video.
No.
Of how a movement gets started. It's basically, I mean, long story short, if one guy comes out against the current narrative or whatever, one person comes out and makes a stand and starts dancing in a crowd by itself, he looks like an idiot. He looks like a crazy person. Like, look at this moron dancing. But suddenly, if you get a second person to come and start dancing with him, all of a sudden that guy is not just a lone moron idiot anymore. Now it's, well, wait a minute, what is going on over there? And then that second person being there then gives the third person that feeling of more comfort to be able to say, hey, I want to dance too. And then they go over and start dancing, and the next thing you know, there's a tipping point to where it becomes weirder to not be the dancing guy than it does to be the people dancing. And so that's just kind of how a movement takes place. So without a leader or somebody coming out and putting something out and being a leader is great and it's needed, but without someone else with conviction coming to be a second follower, you can't have a movement. So yeah, it's a really interesting video.
I just posted that YouTube in the home in the chat, LC.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen,
yeah, there's a lot of truth behind that, and it has become a movement. It's a renaissance. It's it wouldn't be this way if it didn't make sense. If there wasn't some validity to the things that you were saying against those broken narratives a year and a half ago, Diverter.
Yeah, Yeah. Well, it's been fun, guys.
Yeah,
Cool.
it's been real and it's been fun, and I appreciate you guys' time. You guys are legends. I mean, at least in your own minds, and
That's all that matters.
no, but seriously, I appreciate you guys' time, and it's always great to be able to chop it up with you guys and get some information out that hopefully a couple of people listen to, and take a step in the right direction and start taking control of their privacy.
Fuck wasabi.